Good morning and welcome to the Soul Shop. I am your host, Phyllis King. And as always, I'm interviewing pioneers and leaders in the area of personal and spiritual growth, leadership, and peak performance. And, I'm fortunate that many of the people I interview, I actually get to try their service. I know them a little bit. Sometimes I know them a lot. Sometimes I know them a little. And today is the case with my very special guest, Bev Martin. Bev is so much more than an intuitive coach, and she has beautiful words that describe the offerings she provides to people. But I like this one the best. She uses the words wisdom emerging. She is a compassionate supporter, brings people to their own truth and awareness. She spent a good chunk of her life developing herself and adding tools to her toolbox to serve more fully to people, to help them become their best selves. And we're going to hear all about the things she can do and different ways she does them. But let's welcome you into the conversation. Hi, Bev. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. The opportunity just to hang with you and chat is...
Oh, you're so kind, as always. One of the things I love about your presence is that you have enormous compassion. You're just so gentle, but you're so firm at the same time. Is that your style? Have you always been that kind of person, or did you develop into that?
I think it is my style. I think when I began, I had all the compassion and the empathy and none of the spine of steel that I have developed, that I think one needs both. Almost to the extent of, if you're deeply compassionate, you also need a way to really, somebody once described me. She said, you have a spine of steel. And I took it as a compliment. I think it was meant that way. But to have both, if you're going to feel deeply, you also need a way to stand up firm, stand up strong. I think I do both. And
absolutely. Well, and I've noticed just from my own interactions with you, because I've been fortunate to be able to utilize your incredible supportive services. You're a master at holding space for others. You really are. You're fantastic at it. And so that steel we're referring to, it doesn't feel like steel while it's happening, but it certainly is required when you're looking at that deep, heavy stuff with folks.
Yes.
So you and I have an interesting history in that synchronicities of life brought us together. We had a common friend, and we never met through the common friend while he was inhabiting the planet. It took him getting off the planet for us to come together. Isn't that somewhat remarkable?
I still think he would be just so pleased, at our interaction.
Yes. Well, and just for the audience sake, I'm referring to a mutual friend. His name was Tom Stokes, and he was a psychotherapist that I befriended. And he was also a practitioner I worked with. And he would often mention Bev's name in passing to me. And so it sort of, and I respected him so much. I took it and I cataloged it in my brain. And, he left the planet sooner than I would have liked to have happen. And I still haven't quite gotten over it. But, it's just when he was gone, I just suddenly thought, Bev Martin. So here we are.
Thank you. Oh.
Okay, so let's dive in here now that we've gotten some of the familiarities out of the way. So you have this beautiful way of speaking. You're not from the United States. What's the story?
So I was born and raised in South Africa, in Johannesburg, South Africa, through the worst of all of the troubles in that country and nation, and got to enjoy all the beauty of the landscape and the people. And so I'm deeply to my bones South African born. And I was an exchange student in 79, 80, right over that period of time. And I always knew that I would live in the United States. It was the strangest thing. My encyclopedias when I was a kid, so bit of context, no television in South Africa until about 1978, 79. So I was a young teenager by the time we got TV. So books and radio and all of those things. So I had a set of encyclopedias that were very American, as I now know them to be, but I loved them. And they weren't the sort of boring, just informational. They were colorful and interesting, but it was very much American culture. And so a little part of my brain went like, well, the real world is in the United States, my young child brain. And so I always knew I would somehow have something to do with the US. Then I applied to be an exchange student, and they said, you could go to Australia or wherever. We tell you where you're going. I'm like, I'm open to anything.
That's as a teenager?
As a teenager, I was 17. And two of us got chosen from our high school, and they said, we'll let you know where you're going. And of course, at that point, I was like, anywhere. I'd never left the country, anywhere. Of course, United States, the West Coast of the United States, and it was marvelous. I was in a tiny little town called Tootle, Washington, the year that Mount St. Helens erupted. I was there. So there's that. And then during my exchange year, I was in a very fancy car with a friend who was able to drive. I was still not, I wasn't driving here, but I was a passenger going over one of the bridges into Portland. And I looked at the city and I was just like, oh, I'm going to live here. And as a fellow intuitive, the difference between a thought and a decision and a knowing. This was just a knowing. And there was a part of me going, oh, wow. And so fast forward, but I grew up in South Africa, had marvelous experiences there, and much of my heart still resides there.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you have family there? Do you go back there regularly?
I do when we're allowed to. I've been eager to get back, because of the COVID restrictions. I'm way overdue. I usually go back at least every 2 years, and now I'm way overdue. My mom is there, my brother, my dearest friends, my spiritual community. So I still have a big anchor in South Africa.
And so did you marry someone American?
I married someone American since I've been here. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Second marriage, but yes, my husband is American.
So how have you managed to keep this beautiful, it's not an accent where you're from, but over here, you speak so beautifully. How have you managed to maintain that?
It's so strange to me because when I go back to South Africa, the feedback I get is, oh, you're so American. So it's like, well, and then my husband always laughs when I call my mom. I call my mom every week and we have a lovely conversation. And he always says, oh, you're so South African when you're on the phone with your mom.
Oh, that's so funny.
But I've had to adapt because, one of the things I do is hypnotherapy.
Yes.
And when you're guiding someone deep into relaxation, that is not the time that I would like them to go, what did she say? Because of my accent. So I've had to adapt it. Like one of the relaxations was, you relax all the muscles, including the muscle on the leg, the lower leg, called what you would say the calf. In my accent, it's the calf. And so people would be like, wait, what? And so I've adapted or just said things like, and relax the lower part of your leg and try not to say words that are too
oh my gosh, I love it. That's great. Well, I've noticed that you have 2 different bachelor's degrees. How did that happen?
Well, mostly it's communication studies, but my major was drama and film. Psychology.
Did you want to be an actress? What was going on?
I did.
Oh, amazing. I love it.
I really did. And of course, to want to be an actress in a country that didn't have television, but I did do some plays and things like that. I loved being, doing some theater.
So was that your first love and then you moved into psychology? How did that all happen?
Really, it was parallel. I really wanted to understand psychology. And part of that was from having been growing up an intuitive kid, because I could always empathically feel what was going on with people. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted some kind of structure that said, so this feeling that I'm having about this, here's what it means in the outer world. I could make sense of it in my world, but those two worlds didn't often line up.
I see.
My disappointment, however, with studying psychology was that it was so much about pathology. all the ways in which we can, the wheels can fall off, or things can go wrong. And I really respect and understand the need for that, for healing and repair. But I was most curious about, like, what makes us awesome, resilient, capable, and so I found those sorts of studies later on, but I did study psychology.
So you got both these degrees simultaneously?
Psychology it's just a Bachelor of Arts. So just the BA part. Yeah. Yeah.
So fast forward. So you went to the United States as an exchange student. You stayed for a couple of years, or
just one year.
Then you went back to South Africa.
Went back and studied drama and film. Met my first husband.
Okay.
Married way too young, and partly that was my own family was falling apart. My parents were divorcing, and I think my little brain said, "Oh, I know, I'll quickly marry and reassemble a family." And that was, that was an interesting strategy, but not the right one. And so then when I worked there in corporate life, corporate world, and in training in big corporation, and then something just kept calling me back. It's like, and partly I thought, well, let me go to the US and get this ridiculous idea out of my brain. I'll go for a year, have an adventure, and then come back and, get on with my life.
Incredible.
And, from the moment I made the choice, it was a kind of a calling. I had to leave a lot behind. I had to leave a really good job behind, my friends, my known world. And I thought, well, I'll just do this 1 year adventure, and then I'm coming back. And from the moment I started following the intuitive calling that said, you go this way, my own intuition again sort of increased. It was almost like my soul said, now you're getting it. Do this. And I started out in Long Beach, California as a nanny. There was a way that I could be here. And while I was there, a man that I'd been seeing in South Africa, a very, dear friend, came to talk sense into me and say, get back on the plane. What do you think you're doing? And so I had one of those watershed moments, which was, he makes sense. He's saying, you're capable of so much more than being a nanny. True. What do you think you're doing all this way far away from home? True. So logically, he made a really good argument for, goodness, girl, get back on the plane. But I wasn't driving with my logical mind. I was really listening to my spirit. And my spirit was, you've got gifts to unpack. You've got yourself to discover. So I remember having the feeling that there was like two hands. In the one hand, it was all these logical things, including an offer of marriage from him and to go to Italy and do some training together, which I would have loved to do. So in the hand of what's possible was really quite full. The other hand was, I don't know yet. It had nothing in it except a big question mark. And my soul said, choose, I don't know.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's amazing. That is amazing. And that's so powerful. That is so, so powerful. And this is what you currently help people with, is helping people stay with their intuitive sense. Yes. It's just so remarkable, though, because you have this incredible mind, which you've used fabulously, and you continue to do so. But you had the something to be able to listen to that soul's calling. What is that? How were you able to do that? That's not easy. Our minds tell us what to do. How did you do that?
And I'm a Capricorn. I am practical, I love that you also are a practical psychic. It makes sense to me. It was really very interesting. I had to let the voice of the soul be clearer and stronger than the voice of my mind.
How did you do that? How did the fear not take you over? How did you not talk yourself?
At times it did. At times there was a little argument in there, especially when I went to the Long Beach airport and put the man on the plane. And it was like, what did I do? There were moments, certainly, where I didn't win the argument, but there was such a calm, peaceful knowing that it didn't know much further than the present moment. So on the one hand, the vision that I'd been given of what was possible with this man and the whole story was kind of along the whole Cinderella story to the end.
Mhm.
We'll do this and we'll do that. And of course, the mind loves that. It's like, oh, good. The mind loves that. Here's the whole story and a happy ever after, possibly, compared to, not much, right? I'd had a dream the night before he left, which was very fascinating. And the dream also calmed me. The dream was like, let him go, hold steady to yourself. And it had a nylon stocking with a run in it. And it was like, you're running. If you go with him, you're running away from yourself. I'm like, okay. And every time I considered the I don't know, I felt peaceful. My mind was still going, but my heart felt steady. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I hope I don't regret it. But at each turn, staying connected to my soul, it's like peacefulness and calm. And like one piece would be delivered, like call so-and-so or do this, or, it was like little breadcrumbs that compared to the certainty that the mind thought it was offering me, looked a little skimpy, those little breadcrumbs, but they were of a different quality. And so one of the things I often teach is consider the question that we're asking. So if the question was, how can I be the most secure in the world right now? Then hand A would have been the right answer, right? But the question really was, what experience can allow me to become even more of who I really am? And I'll be honest, I didn't phrase it that way then because I didn't know then. Yeah. It was like a faith and a trust in something greater. But in retrospect now, that was like the question that was pushing me from underneath. And so one of the things I love to go is like, what's my real question here?
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll certainly dive more into that, but you clearly have extraordinary courage, clearly. And that, to me, this is my point of view, to me, that is one element that typically makes the difference for people. We all get afraid, but if we can somehow muster the courage to go in a direction that we know, but how do you teach courage?
Well, it doesn't feel like courage in the moment. I remember shortly after that, still in California at the time, getting a bus to Santa Barbara, just because, it was beautiful and lovely. I spent the day with myself on the beach in Santa Barbara. And I remember going around a corner of a cove. It was just this beautiful thing, really beautiful private little cove area. And those little white birds I don't know what, running up and down. And I remember just sobbing and crying like I don't think I ever have ever again. Just sobbing, just sort of really in a way saying, God, what did I do? And even then, feeling quite a nice cathartic cry. But I think courage is, I love what you say about courage, because I do think courage is part of the soul. There's bravery in the world. But I think there's that kind of courage and faith that the soul says, look, I'm not going to show you the path, but hang in here with me. It's like, okay, and perhaps a sense definitely of something greater. It's like, I know nothing, but I will hold your hand, help me, And I suppose part of courage, because I remember writing in my journal going, I'm either doing the bravest thing or the stupidest thing in the world. It'll depend how it turns out, which it is, which one it was. But then making the commitment to, okay, I'm going to follow this trail, and it's possible it'll all blow up in my face, but okay, right? So it's the courage is not even a sense of I'm brave enough to make something wonderful happen, but I'm brave enough to make a mistake and to trust that something greater will be there for me. Let me make an error if necessary. But at each step, and then of course, because life is wonderful, at each turn then a doorway would open, or at least a curtain would open a crack, and I would meet a person or know that this is the right thing. I don't have any evidence that'll settle my mind. And at times my mind was still squawk, squawk.
Mm-hmm.
But just sitting with that sense of, I'm living true to some part of me that has yet to be born.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
See,
That's
I
beautiful. So you were nannying. You sent the boyfriend on his way.
sent him on his way.
How long did you stay in Southern California?
It was only ultimately about 3 or 4 months because I was being really called up to Portland. And like my heart was just saying, like, get thee to Portland. And the way these things turn out, the family I was nannying for, who I still very close and love so very much, the little boy who's now a big grown-up man, he had been in a really wonderful childcare situation. And then I came along, and I think they were helping me more than necessary. But there was going to be a time in which he would have to choose. I'm either going to get to go back to this original childcare situation, or I'm it. And I thought, I can't commit. I don't know how long, and I wouldn't want them to lose that opportunity. So that was another courage point. I had to go, I'm going to let go of this safety valve and go up to Portland. And so we did that, and he got to carry on with a situation that they liked for the baby, and got myself up to Portland, where my soul mother, whose name is Barbara Matson, who I met when I was 17 and she was in her 50s, and we've known each other deeply, deeply. She's a mother to me. She said, oh, well, what a coincidence. They had moved and needed someone to take care of their house in Portland. Roof over the head.
Amazing.
Yes. And then Barbara, the same marvelous Barbara. Barbara was at the coast in Wheeler, where they have this beautiful house on the coast. And Barbara and a friend called Jack met my husband, now my husband, Jim. And Jim had just come back from studying acupuncture around the world, working in Boston, doing acupuncture, and is just this marvelous person. And so he was traveling on the coast, and both Barbara and Jack was Jim's friend from kindergarten, both Barbara and Jack said, Jim, you should meet this girl, this woman, Bev. And they called me and they said, you must meet this guy. And I was like, I don't want to meet a guy. I'm just busy getting on with my life. I don't want to meet a guy right now. I'm kind of focused, but sure, I'll meet an interesting person. And what an interesting person. And he and I talked for an hour on the phone. I just thought, wow, this is an interesting man. And the next day he called and said, I'm right near your home. Can I pop in for a cup of tea? I said, sure. And from putting down the phone to hearing the doorbell, walking towards the doorbell, I was like, oh, I'm going to marry him. I've never met him. I've only talked with him on the phone. I was like, and I said a bad word. I was like, oh, shit, I'm going to marry him. Because it was just like awareness.
Oh my gosh.
And then fortunately, when I opened the door, I was very happy with what I saw.
Oh.
And married for 25 years.
Oh, that's amazing. But I'm still really fascinated by this piece of you that surrenders to clarity, that you get moments of clarity and you go with it. Because I just find in my own work, people, it's elusive to people. They may get it for a moment, and then their thoughts will intrude and they won't be able to stay with it. And you have to repeat. But just in that statement of like, I knew I was going to marry this person. Have you defined that for yourself? I mean, I know I have your resume here, which we'll talk more about later. But have you defined what your process is, or does it matter whether or not you define it?
No, I have, because I teach intuition. I have had to sit down and go like, how do you do that?
Yes.
And I think for me, it's always a clear vision. And it's not a vision like a 5-year plan that we make entirely with our logical mind. But if there's a vision of something so compelling that says, that this is the world I'd like to live in, even if it feels a little fantasy at the moment. It's like, would I rather have what's right in front of me that is really clear, or am I willing to take a risk to go towards that I'd really like to create? And if the vision is clear enough, I feel like the vision can sort of compel us forward. And I'm doing it like this because it's like baby step, baby step. So the vision is like the big magnetic pull. And, so partly so in terms of relationship, I had sort of negotiated with the divine. I say that loosely because we know who the boss is, but I had said to the divine, I don't really think I'm cut out for a relationship. I had been divorced, of course, from a very short marriage in South Africa. And I thought, oh, my parents had been divorced. So there was a part of me that said, unless, dear Lord, it's really meant to be, I'm not going to go in that direction. And then I made a list. I said, if this person that I meet is kind of like this, well, then okay. But if not, don't bother me.
Don't bother. I love it.
Don't let me get distracted by something that isn't, if it's ideal and marvelous, and of course it's not perfect, but like ideal for the soul, ideal for this life, sign me up. And if not, don't bother.
That's fascinating again to me, because what you're describing to me is what many people in this era would call the law of attraction, that you've set an intention, but you do these things organically. I think that's what's most fascinating to me about you, that you're natural at your intuitive awareness, and that your instincts automatically take you to the realm that many of us work tirelessly to try and understand and practice in our lives. So that's remarkable. I guess that's why we admire you so much.
Oh, thank you. I attribute some of it to having been brought up without television.
Oh, I didn't think of that. Say more.
I really do, because I was that goofy kid, and except there were other kids also, because we were not distracted by a lot of input. There wasn't. So we were reading. We were lying on the grass looking at the clouds for hours, whereas when I described that now to my daughter when she was little, and I'd say, we would do that, she felt so sorry for me. I was like, not at all. So developing the imaginative muscle, not the fantasy one, the imaginative one, which is the one that creates, I think that was put into place because of only having one's own inner world really to rely on. And funny enough, there's an author, and I'm not going to remember his name right now, but he wrote a book, which I love the title. It's called Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try. And it's about the opposite of like focusing on a goal and getting the goal. It's like being in this kind of like, imaginative, creative, and go figure, this man also was born and raised in South Africa.
Oh.
So I don't think that's a coincidence. I think the way that we think, there's also, of course, the very African ways of being that, that I was able to sort of bring in, which is a deep compassion for others and a sense of we rather than I. Mm-hmm. So perhaps some of that had something to do with it too.
Now, doesn't really matter. Do you have dual citizenship?
I do not. I committed here, and it broke my heart. I felt like a bigamist.
Oh,
I felt like a bigamist. I'm like, oh, and I'm all in here.
Okay. Well, we're so fortunate to have you. So you have a lot of certifications here, and you're obviously a life coach and a certified trainer of various methods and hypnotherapist. You do NLP. You have some trainings that I'm not quite familiar with, but I'm sure they've added some juicy things to your toolbox. Are these things that you use singularly? Like you say, oh, I'm going to use this modality on such and such person, or do you just kind of I'm just thinking of when I've worked with you, it feels very organic and we just go where we need to go. You're not doing a specific thing with me. How do you approach your work at this point?
Absolutely is that way. Things have melded together. The thing that I feel is the thread throughout is language.
Oh.
I'm a nerd for words and language, and I love to listen to how the person is speaking, because it's giving me a map of their map. And so I would say the intuitive piece and the language piece come together. So the neuro-linguistic programming, the linguistic piece is the language. But then I've also listened to how spirit speaks, and it's so deliberate. So in a session or in a reading, and you know this, you do it too, I've seen you, is when you're bringing something forward, you're choosing the words particularly. They're not haphazard, they're not random. It's like, oh, not this word, it's this word.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something to that. And so I would say the language is the thread that runs through everything. And there's no particular modality, except that I've learned a lot from cognitive science, neuro-linguistic programming. And I'm oftentimes, I do quite a bit of work with health. And so if someone is working with, there's a process that I use called communicating with a symptom, which we're asking the symptom, so symptom, what's the deal? Why are you here? What, how often when we heal from something, years later, we can get perspective and we can say, I understand why I kept turning my ankle, or I understand why I had migraines for so much. So I like to shorten that understanding time and ask the symptom now, especially a chronic thing. So symptom, since I like to believe that you're part of my wisdom, give me the scoop now so I can avail of it. And so that comes from my work in health with NLP. And so if I know I'm working with health specifically, I'll be bringing that out of the toolbox. But mostly it's just listening. I'm listening to language. I love to seize on a limiting belief. Oh, it's one, kind of thing. And so mostly it's that, but my fervent, strong belief is that every person who consults with us and with me already has everything they need. And so I think of having a mirror and a flashlight. My mirror is so the person can see what's good and true and beautiful about themselves reflected in our conversation. And then my little flashlight is to sort of shine light in little areas that might have gotten dusty or dark. And usually with a question, I'll ask, it's like directing attention in that way. Mostly, and I often confess to people before we begin, I say, most everything you hear today, you already know. Because you do. But you know how a good girlfriend will remind you.
But that's kind of bringing us back to where we began when you call it wisdom emerging. Maybe we know it, but we've forgotten it, or we don't have access to it in some way, and you help us unearth that. So it's a beautiful process. And another one of your superpowers, in addition to courage and your ability to hear and listen so effortlessly, is you're extraordinarily compassionate and you're non-judgmental. I know when I'm in a session with you, I feel like I can just let it all out and it's okay. I'm not going to get any retribution or repercussions on the other side.
Right.
Is that on purpose, or is that just your nature?
I think it's part of the nature. And funnily enough, I was studying Enneagram recently, and do you know the Enneagram?
A little bit, not
too
much.
I only know, tiny bit too. But in studying the Enneagram, is like, oh, it's actually part of my nature, which of course has a plus and a minus. So the plus side is the capacity to be really neutral, like Switzerland, and hold everything. And because I see everyone as a soul, there's nothing to judge. We're doing the best we can. Here we are in a human body, limited, pain. Sometimes, it can only do so much, as I'm discovering with each passing year. And then we are also aware of this unlimitedness of our spiritual self. And so right from the get-go, we have this feeling of, I'm capable of so much. Oh, what did I get done today? Not much, right? So we're in that place. And so to not judge ourselves, I think, but to rather know ourselves would be the main order of business. So what I discovered with this Enneagram thing was it's partly a gift to be able to see all sides of a situation, but it also makes one a little wishy-washy. So I learned like, oh, so that's where it's a strength. And for me to at times to make more of a commitment to things, because it's a gift to be able to see all sides, but sometimes to pick a lane. That's how I'm learning for my own growth.
I love it. And so how long have you been in practice, by the way? I don't even know.
Gosh, actually, as long as I've been in the United States, so about 27 years.
Okay. So
Yeah.
talk to us now about your offerings. I know that when I have a session with you, we usually talk for an hour. We do it on Zoom. What do we call that?
I've called it over the years a light dialogue. I love the metaphor of anything with light. It's a light dialogue, or I think I just call it a session now, just to keep it like really simple. What's what, and that's an hour or 90 minutes. And then I also have classes. So I'm teaching intuition, and I love working with, especially with successful women who have given it all, and so much of our lives, especially I think as women, is, what more can I offer? How more can I fit in? How can I be more? And then the soul says, guess what? You didn't come to prove that you can be the CEO of blankety blank. That's actually not the whole point. So I usually meet people at that conjunction where they're kind of like, so I've got the white picket fence, I've had the right amount of children, I've done it, like, is this it? It's like, no, it isn't. But wait, there's more, like an infomercial. And so I love to help people find like, what's the deeper meaning and purpose? Not just that we fit into the culture and we do all the right things, but like, have I become myself? And that does require courage, because in that we might need to do something differently than everyone else we know, or annoy some people, frankly. The soul is not so concerned with the popularity contest that the ego might be. So I teach intuition, and I have had an offering that I'm looking to find a way to fit it into intuition, funnily enough. I have been teaching NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, to coaches, with an emphasis on the language and how to listen. So teaching them my process, really. And so I have had intuition and NLP as sort of two separate things. And my intention now is to bring it all together, because it's all together in me. And I used to have an idea that people who really appreciated intuition might be a different kind of person who wanted the more strategic. But now, it's together. So partly I'm calling it intuitive thinking partnership. So I've got intuition and thinking side by side, and teaching intuition, it's a kind of a conversation mastery, how to listen and how to have more impact in each conversation. And that has been mostly focused on healers, helpers, coaches. But really, I feel like we all could benefit on learning how to listen in that deeper way and be more impactful in the way we communicate.
Oh, Stefan. Now, is this a class that it's currently creating, or you have it available now?
It's not open yet, but it's available now, and probably be back on again in September.
That's exciting. So, and the best way to reach you is really through your website, bevmartin.com.
That's right.
Well, that's how I always reach you. And your website's really lovely and beautiful, and it just feels like a breath of fresh air. So I think when people go to the website, they automatically feel your energy. So good job. And what else do we need to know about what you do and how you do it and what you're passionate about?
Oh, thanks so much for this, Phyllis. I figure whenever we can come together with another compassionate person, and yay for us who have several of these in our lives, or find one if you don't, find 2 or 3, and give yourself the opportunity to let yourself hear yourself think. And so I like to think that my work is that way. If someone says I'm wrestling with this decision, I like them to say enough that they can hear themselves think. I use my mirror to sort of point out something so they hear themselves. And then if necessary to say, I notice that this is how you're thinking about that. Is that the most useful way? So I would say any opportunity to sit with a kind, compassionate human and hear yourself think, take it. My work is this way, your work is this way as well. Your the way that you do your podcast and the way you show up for people. So they can definitely do this with you as well. And so that would be my invitation is if you're working with something challenging and you can't hear yourself think for the moment, reach out to Phyllis, reach out to me. I love to help that. And my goal, strangely enough, is at the end of each call is for a person to hang up and go, well, I did know that. I did know that because as much as certainly it's a lovely ego boost for people to say your session changed my thinking and helped my world, I love them to come away going, and I can do this for myself. Do I have to do it alone? No. But I can when I'm in the presence of another compassionate person.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Now, I only ask this next question because I'm selfish. So do you plan on writing a book? I mean, you're doing classes and you're doing your work and dispensing your wisdom and your process to people, but it would be lovely to read your ideas and your perspectives and however format you want to disperse that. So yes. What is that going to happen?
Yes, and I think you're my spirit guide at the moment going, Bev, get on with it. My book is in piles of paper. I'll spare you, but I've been playing with a book for several years. And in many ways, just sort of going like, what is it I really want to say? And so I've learned a lot by, the process. And yes, I am putting it together. And mostly it is, how do we do this, and how might any one of us, since we do know what we know, how might we tap into it in a reliable way for more success, more joy, just, to live the errand that our soul sent us on. We want to be sure that we do what we came here to do and have a lot of fun in the process.
I love that. And in the meantime, you have a newsletter people can sign up for. Is that correct?
Yes. Thank you for that. Yeah. It's very infrequent. My promise to myself is to make it more. I tend to wait till I have something to say. And so you're not going to get inundated with lots of emails, but it's a infrequent, but I usually when there's a tip or when something's going on in the world that I feel like we need to just go, whew, we're not alone, send out that newsletter. And there is a sign-up place on bevmartin.com. Just put your name in.
Well, perfect, bevmartin.com. And I can't imagine there'd be too many emails from you.
Oh, I like to keep it short.
Well, Bev, you're a delight. I can't say enough about the work you do and how much it's benefited me and how much I enjoy sessions with you. And I'm sure there'll be another one coming soon because they are exactly that, getting us closer to our own awareness and information. And it has a settling feeling. It just, if you're all over the map, all of a sudden you feel put back together. And you are incredibly kind and compassionate. And back to the book momentarily, you need an audio version as well.
Oh, thank you.
This lovely calming voice. But thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today. It's just lovely to share a space with you.
This was a pleasure. Thank you so much.